When you were president of the European Parliament, you were admired by a lot of people, including myself, for standing up to the European governments and for strengthening the democratic responsiveness of the European Union. And now you're about to change roles and to enter government, at least that's what I hope for. How will you approach this question from a different perspective when you have changed roles? Will you step back? Will you take yourself back as German Chancellor to strengthen the democratic responsiveness in the European Union?
Entschuldigung, the poor colleague from Italy, I kicked him away. Yeah, I'm a football player, the poor guy. You know, this is a very interesting question, because all the people who know me say, yeah, when you are then entering the European Council, then I want to listen to you, what you are telling about the European Parliament. The Council, the European Council of Heads of States and Government, is a very powerful and mightful instrument. It is the core institution in the European Union. After serving 22 years in the European Parliament, I can tell you this is the deciding institutions. What we did in the European Parliament, together with the European Commission during the last years, was an attempt to introduce a kind of check and balances system in the European Union. If the European Council, and in my eyes that was an error partially in the European Council, tries to draw all the decision making on its own level, which is understandable. It was understandable, for example, during the banking crisis. If you are in a situation as a head of government that the whole banking system of your country is breaking down, and then you can't wait and read what the Lisbon Treaty or the interpretation of the Lisbon Treaty is telling you, then you must act boldly and in a very coherent and tough way. That was the reason why I, as a president of the parliament or chairman of a parliamentary institution, understood that in an exception, the European Council draw responsibilities on its own level and decided. But the tendency to transform that exception in a rule was what we saw in the follow-up. And the problem was, what I told the heads of states and government is, if you draw everything on your level, you are introducing the principle of unanimity by the back door, by the back room, because the big achievement of the Lisbon Treaty was that we tried to introduce in around, I think, 80 additional levels the majority vote as a rule. Therefore, I would, as a Chancellor of Germany, try to encourage the communitarian institution to do their job and to give to the community, to the communitarian institutions, the right and the power to do what they have to do, and to get back to the role of the European Council to define the major political guidelines of the European Union, and not to introduce in the last details, which is at the end a kind of blockage. They are not responsible for that. I understand them. They have often to get at home and to justify even things for which they are not responsible. Therefore, I have a certain understanding for the heads of state and government. But at the end, I think the European Union is much better functioning and flourishing if every level is doing what is foreseen in the treaty for that level. And which is concerning the European Parliament, quite clear. If I would be a member of the European Council, I would encourage the President of the Council, Donald Tusk, to integrate the President of the European Parliament as they integrate the President of the European Commission. Until today, I don't understand why the President of the European Parliament is not treated on equal footing with the presidents of other institutions. There is often an argument, I heard it, yeah, because in my country, the President of the Parliament is also not joining the meeting of the government. And my answer to it was, but you are not the government of the European Union. If you are the government of the European Union, then you must appear directly in front of the European Parliament. Then I understand that you will not see the President of the European Parliament in your meeting. Okay. But you aren't the government of the European Union. The European Union is not a federal state with a federal government. The European Union is a union of countries and nations represented by three pillars, or by two pillars. The intergovernmental, the member states pillar represented by the European Council, and the people, the nations represented by the European Parliament. And both pillars are creating a common institution, the Commission, which is leading the administrative role. This is applying to the administrative role. And therefore, these three pillars, Commission in the mid, Council as representative of the states, and the Parliament as representative of the nations, are building a kind of triangle of institutions. That was my view. Okay, there are different other views. I was not successful. They were always sticking to their position, but one, as a German chancellor, one step would be, I would invite Antonio Tajani to join the council meeting, and I think he would be very happy.
During the course of this very interesting seminar that we had these days, we really discussed about the issue of populism and the issue of cohesion within Europe, in the sense, in the level of European identity. And we noticed that during the crisis, and especially after the Brexit, suddenly everybody realized that people did not know what the European Union is, or what it does, or what it stands for. So it was apparent that the people in Greece, in Britain, in Spain, it was not clear to them why it is beneficial for us to support the European Union and therefore make so many sacrifices to support it. So my question has to do with whether would you suggest maybe a policy of common European education, maybe introducing a basis of some common courses where we can be taught European history and not only focus on our nationalistic historical views. And that way we can expand our knowledge and stop being afraid of each other all the time. So I think this would be very beneficial for the European project as a whole and for Germany as the main country in the Union as well. Thank you.
I agree with one proposal you made in your contribution, that we should have a kind of common, in schools, of common education about the European Union and about what it is, to start earlier with information, and by the way, not to reduce it to an academic debate, because academics in Europe all over are well informed about the European Union, but we should start in very early, much earlier in school education, to explain what this community of nations and states is in reality. But that will not solve the problem we have already discussed 2 or 3 times, or to what I made already remarks today 2 or 3 times, this unbalanced development, economically unbalanced development within the European Union. By the way, between not only North and South, also between East and West. This is often reduced only to a kind of Mediterranean problem, and it's also a problem between Western and Eastern European countries and within the member states, between different groups in the society. I must get back to the role of leading persons, of party leaders, of prime ministers, of heads of states, of economic leaders, of scientists. If there is not an entire unconditional recognition that the European integration is irreversible because we want to go ahead and to deepen it. If there is not a common sense, if there is on the left, like on the right side, still that cynical game of those people who tell in, I give you an example, I know there's such people, who make big events, big meetings, with speeches against the European Union. I quoted once, earlier times we were ruled by Moscow, and now we are ruled by Brussels. And then you meet that people behind closed doors, and then they tell you, you know, I have there a project in the southern, eastern part of my country. There is a problem, we need money, could you not, so. The same people who use the benefits of the European Union, who know about the advantages they have from their membership, are playing that blame game. And then, because responsible people tell to them, yeah, I understand you, and because we think ordinary citizens should not suffer because their leaders are playing games, they get what they want. And then they return at home and they tell to the people, I solved the problem. And for the citizen, it is the government who has solved the problem. And then they continue. It was me, the success coming from the national capital. And if they fail, if they don't achieve, it was Brussels. I call that a blame game. And that blame game is destroying the spirit of Europe. Therefore, I repeat, an unconditional recognition, an unconditional support of that idea is needed by all responsible politicians, coming from the right or coming from the left, coming from the center, liberal or socialist, Christian Democrat or whatever, or Syriza, or I don't know what. I expect that somebody who is a member of the European Council, I get back to that institutions, tells with pride, I'm a member of that union of democracies, and I'm sitting in the council which is coordinating that union of democracies. If we would start instead to play always Europe against national interests and national interests against Europe. By the way, these are not only the populists. From time to time, these are members of the European Council playing that game.